Hey guys, Nadja here, and today I'm going to give you my review of Diablo 4 after 15 days of playtime on my Druid. So we're going to break this into 4 different parts: the early, the mid, the late, and the end game, just to keep it a little more simple. The first off, in the early game, I thought the campaign was super strong. I started off in World Tier 2. I felt like it was a good step in difficulty for even strong gamers. I've played games most of my life. I have 400 days played in RuneScape. I've played a few. I played Diablo 3, and quite a few other RPGs in my life. I thought there was a great variety of viable builds available for campaign. There was minimal pressure on gear. I felt like it was very much learn your class, learn the synergies of your skills and what you can do with them and how you like to play with them, and very much just pushing that part of it rather than focusing on, well, these are the exact substats that you need and these are the eye level powers that you should be looking for and exactly what stats should be in what slots. And it wasn't as min-maxy as that. We really just kept moving through the campaign very steadily. A lot of the campaign bosses were fairly strong. There was one of the druids that was giving me and my buddy a hard time in the forest early on. Maybe because we weren't picking good builds, or however, we definitely got hung up there in World Tier 2 at least. And most of the other campaign bosses weren't too bad. We had to focus up for sure. And then once we got to the capstones, it was definitely a good jump in difficulty. I felt like it challenged us in many ways. We were dying to all kinds of boss mechanics. So in general, it was pretty good. There were a few cons of the campaign though. While there were quite a few viable builds, I don't think many of them were fast or could get you through the story in a very effective manner. There was no mobility until late in the campaign. It felt really weird. Normally you want to get people moving through the early game, at least through the mid game, so that they can get to your end game. If you have them crawling around your world the whole time, it just doesn't feel good. Getting your horse in Act 4 and then you barely use it between Act 4 and Act 6. You're just walking around hell in a few places and you don't even really get to use it. You kind of have it, but it's not really of use. It would have been useful when you were running everywhere looking for Donin and stuff. So there was a lot of RNG to determine what build I was actually going to end up running for the Druid. One of the only builds that doesn't require a lot of aspects is Shred early on, but I wanted to play something else. So I was really only left with that or a really suboptimal build, and that was kind of why I had a problem with quite a few of the bosses. But in the end, we ended up getting there and pushing through, but it wasn't an easy progression through there if you weren't using the leveling build or the one that they had determined was better for that kind of situation. And there's always going to be a build that's better in certain situations than other ones, and so if you're using something that you're not ready for, obviously it's not going to work out. So I'm not trying to say that. However, I felt like more builds should have been able to get you through campaign without having to metagame, or if you're going to make us metagame, at least give us some more direction within the game in which way that these things work. Damage was one of the biggest things that I had a difficult time understanding because it's kind of convoluted, honestly. There's nowhere in the game that tells you the different bucket system that it has. It doesn't really lay any of that out for you. The way that your base stats go into your damage, and just really how it all adds up and then multiplies, and really the whole equation itself, it's very convoluted. And when you just look at things, and I wish that it was more straightforward and you could figure it out more within the game rather than having to go through all these different third-party tools to find all of this stuff. I mean, I can do that. I can Google all I want and YouTube all kinds of things, but I don't want to ruin my immersion. I would much rather just stay within the game and be taught things from within the game and get there on my own rather than feel like I'm being spoon-fed. Here's the meta. Here's what you're going to do. Now, moving into the mid game, I felt pretty good. The campaign was nearly done at this point, or completely done, and we were starting to get into the Paragon board and starting more of the world exploration and getting into some of the altars of Lilith, which were super slow because of the low amount of mobility that you have within the class, without like the Tempest Roar builds or really a lot of the movement while unstoppable builds and stuff like that. Side quests in Area Renown were fairly decent. I think a lot of people just spacebarred through them. There were quite a few quests that were pretty interesting, I think, though. The one guy tied to a tree. I am terrible with names, so please forgive me. Even though if I thought these quests were fun or anything like that, I may not remember a lot of the character names. But I thought a lot of the plot lines they were at least a little bit engaging if you gave them a little bit of time. I stream a lot, so I'm usually talking about what quest I'm doing and things like that, and exploring the lore with people and whatnot. So I really enjoy that side of it. I feel like there could be more depth to the world, and that's definitely something that they can add in the future. But that's not something that we have now, and so it's not something that we can give them credit for by any means. The lack of cutscenes was really one of the biggest deal breakers of all the side quests. Maybe not every side quest have it, but they all kind of lead into a bigger story on their own kind of thing as well. Like one leads into the next and then the next, and then maybe you did 5 or 7 quests in a string, and then you're at the end and now you get a cool little cutscene. Something like that to break up a little bit of the monotonous grind would be great. Most people don't like reading dialogue. They either want to hear it or they want to see it, and they want it to be interesting. Otherwise, they're just going to space through it. Even though I may read a lot more of it or make things more exciting than they may actually be, just because I'm interested in the world or what's going on in Sanctuary, it doesn't mean that other people appreciate it in the same way. During the big games, really when gear became interesting. Up until now, you were just kind of running around. Bigger number, better thing is all that really mattered. We started getting ancestral gear aspects and all of that. So as far as the Druid went, the builds really started to change with all the aspects. Your pulverized aspect and all kinds of other things like the Tempest Roar or the Waxing Gibbous, and you could really start getting into some really strong farming builds and really get rolling. However, the aspects didn't really allow for a lot of variance within the different builds. They were pretty preset in what builds they wanted them to be used in. There were a couple that kind of overlapped, like maybe critical strikes with core skills increase your attack speed, or the restore primary resource. There was a couple that could be, or the damage while fortified, damage to crowd controlled enemies, things like that. They could definitely be used in a couple builds, but generally speaking, the super interesting ones were just hyper focused for the builds that were meta already from the beginning and were made by the creators. I feel like there wasn't really a whole lot of uniqueness that emerged out of Season 0 that wasn't already put there by the developers, and that's something I'd like to see explored more. Getting to the Paragon board was super fun. The problem was you would have to go back quite frequently, and you maybe couldn't remember what you had or what you liked or anything of that nature. So when you got halfway through your Paragon board, you were like, oh hey, I've leveled up this glyph and I've gone with this board and this board, but now I need to completely change it. And not only that, but you have to go through and click every single one. So it's kind of annoying. And then I was playing with the controller for a long time just for arthritis purposes and my hands and stuff. It was just a lot easier. And so doing that was a complete nightmare. I just had to pick up my mouse and do it, which I can only imagine how people on console feel about it. It's got to be absolutely terrible. So it's definitely something I'd like to see changed. I think the Paragon boards were a little too complex for a lot of people. I didn't have too much of a problem with it, but I know a lot of people think it's very intimidating or that they aren't smart enough, even though they've been playing games for a long time and they could just take a little bit of time and put a board together and probably come pretty close. I do enjoy the flexibility to make your own board and try other people's boards out and test out what you like and what doesn't work. In general, I think they're a lot simpler than people make them out to be. It's just kind of pick the legendary nodes that you really want for your build and pick a few other rare nodes along the way and grab as many glyph sockets as you can. They aren't as complex by any means, but they do allow for enough variety to make your build your own. I think Creep Jacker's Paragon board is completely different than a lot of the other people's that have been doing the Druid boards. The Daddy Druid guy that's been making a lot of YouTube videos. My board by any means, and probably your board, you know. So I really like that we get to experiment with that and see a lot of more diversity with the build on that end. I just wish we would see more build diversity in the actual gameplay rather than just hitting bigger or smaller numbers, because our Paragon board is different. I wish we would see more powerful effects, like changing this ability or that ability to different elements, or styles of abilities, and just in general, just changing the build to play differently rather than just plus number, minus number, plus number, minus number kind of thing. Glyphs are a strong late game to end game grind to help you get gear and progress your Paragon board and make you feel more powerful. They're pretty reasonable to get to an effective range at either 15 or 21. I don't think any one particular glyph is too much of a grind, and while you're grinding them, you definitely get incremental rewards that feel like they're not too far apart, so you don't really have a 20-hour period where you're getting nothing. There's no dopamine there. You've gotten 8 Paragon points or 12 Paragon points or something like that. You know, you've made progress on your character, and you can feel at least a little bit more powerful because you've done it, which is good. The thing I don't like about some glyphs is that they're pretty temporary, or once you get later into the game, you'll realize that you absolutely have to meta build. Otherwise, you're not going to start making it through content, which is fine. There's always going to be a point at which your choices start to actually matter. And if you make everything super effective, you make your choices not matter at all. You've just made everything super strong rather than making anybody stand out from the crowd. Now we all just walk through tier 100s with no problem. And that's not as fun either. Like, everything should be challenging at a super high level, even if we do want variety in those builds, or at least more builds in which that can do those type of things. Moving into the late game, I felt the game was super strong. There was a very clear grind in Nightmare Dungeons and Glyphs to get you to the end game. And accounting for the XP rebalance rather than I was obviously playing before the rebalance happened, but I will kind of just progress my head mentally that I would have gotten more XP out of the situation. And I feel like if I had been level 92 to 95, somewhere in there, I would have much more been incentivized to try and push for level 100 to start doing Lilith and Nightmare Dungeons and anything like that than I am at level 80, where people were getting nearly all of their glyphs done in full gear, max gear, but the content that they wanted to do was still 75 at 100 hours away because the XP gap was too far. And now people are like, well, we don't have anything in between that to make us feel progression. And people don't like that. They want to at least feel a little bit of progression, and Paragon points aren't good enough. Like, you get a little bit, like, oh, hey, a little Paragon point. There's 5 willpower, 5 intellect, 5 dexterity. Nobody really cares. So we need to feel more progression feelings, which is why we need more Uber bosses, or maybe just under Uber boss level, where we can go fight and get these gear checks and then be like, oh, hey, sweet, we beat that guy over there, you know, and now we know we're almost ready for Lilith because we could do this, and this. Meanwhile, Lilith currently is just a massive ramp up out of nowhere. You're farming Nightmare Dungeons 30, and then you beat World Tier 4 basically, and you're like, oh, let's go to the capstone, and she just melts you. It's not even comparable. The gap that's sitting there is too big. Gear just became gold. Even if I found good gear, I was going to the Discord to sell it, and so I could reroll stuff at the Occultist because I relatively found what I needed early on. Unless I had another build that I was trying to do in particular and that I needed pieces for right now, I wasn't really keeping a whole lot. I was just kind of selling them and getting my gold and progressing my character that way, because a lot of the affixes were easy enough to get on 3 out of 4 pieces rather than trying to just farm more. Group farming outpaced solo play a disgusting amount. The effectiveness of split farming versus solo farming, it's not even comparable. The amount of XP that you get, the legendary aspects, and even the sigils that you start to get to hoard, you can farm much better maps on average because everyone's using the better maps, obviously. people like Rax went through and determined which maps are faster and better XP than these ones, and which ones give more loot and stuff like that. And people are always going to min-max a game a little bit, which is fine, but group play outpaced solo so dramatically it wasn't even close. I had people progressing 2 to 4 times as fast as me because I wanted to play solo. That didn't feel good, and I can understand being more effective in group play, but at that pace, it was too big of a gap. Storage space didn't really give me a whole lot of problems until I started to want 4 builds for my character kind of thing. So I started with the pulverized build, and then I switched into a shred farming build. I just tried out the Stormclaw build, and then I had the shred NATO for Lilith. So once I started getting into all of those, my gear tab really started to fill out fast. And that's when I started to feel pressure on the storage space. Up until then, I really didn't have that many issues. I kept my uniques in one stash. My Druid built all my Druid pieces, all the extra aspects that I needed, either on my character or in the one tab. Then I had a tab for potions and sigils, which felt good. And I mean, that tab could basically just get completely deleted. And then I had another tab for potential rare gear that I was going through that I was either going to sell on the Discord or maybe work into another one of my builds to replace a piece or anything like that. So it's kind of like my junk tab, right? Any healthy endgame is going to start to have bottlenecks into it to keep you playing, and generally they are pretty healthy for the game, but they should be with meaningful content instead of filler content. Even if it's less efficient and you could do filler content to get it better, there should be accessible ways to get it that's not boring and is engaging. One of the first materials that I ran into this problem with was actually silver ores. The only way to get these is just running around the world and getting them around the edge of the world. It's extremely boring. It does nothing else for your account character. You just run around and you find veins, and basically what's happened is Hell Tides divulged into me running around the edge of the map looking for those and looking for the screaming hell veins. I think something like that should at least be farmable or salvageable from something in the smith, because it's something that we use to forge gear, and we're salvaging all kinds of gear, and a lot of people eventually just stop salvaging gear when they get even remotely into the late game. They just continuously sell all the gear instead of salvaging anything, so it could be a good way to at least bring value back to salvaging, even if it's at a reduced rate. Forgotten Souls are 100% required to upgrade gear or reroll affixes at the Occultist. These are completely required to do any form of endgame activity, and that's completely fine. The only thing that I dislike is that they are time gated, even if it is by the hour or a couple hours at a time, where you have to set aside in your day to actually do it. What I dislike is that it breaks the grind that I'm currently on. It forces me to stop what I'm doing and then participate in Blizzard's schedule. I want to play the game how I want to play. I don't want to match my schedule to what you want me to do. Let me play it how I want to. Make them more accessible again through a different method, or make Helltide available all the time, or make another reduced method of acquisition or anything of the sort. But time gating these kind of activities for something that's completely required feels really bad in design, and it feels very forced to make the player do this, that, or the other rather than give them the freedom of choice. Gold is completely unreasonable to farm for the occultists without trading. The cost that rerolling affixes is ridiculous. And especially when you start trying to redo legendary affixes, they cost way too much. There's no reason that a legendary item should cost more to reroll affixes than a normal rare. You're telling me, you're punishing me for using gear, so now I have to have my upgrade sit in my chest for a long time and do nothing until I get the gold to actually reroll the affix that I want. And the only way for me to trade is now to go onto third-party tools or websites or anything like that to trade for gold, which is allowed, but it's an extra step, and it breaks me out of my focus in the game and my rhythm in the game and my immersion within the game. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that trade channels only have a couple hundred people in them or a couple thousand people, whatever it is, and there's no real form to locate any person within the game to actually trade unless you know them already and have their battle tag or something like that. There's no way to actually engage with new people within the game and to grow your friend circle. Pushing up into endgame, there's not a whole lot for you to do. There's Lilith, who's an absolutely excellent fight, but most people are either cheesing her, like in most ARPGs with Uber bosses, or they just flat out can't do it because the mechanics are too difficult, and there's no build up to get you to that point. You just get to go in there and be on a death loop until you understand everything to a T, and it's not very fun for a lot of people on that end. I managed to do it, but I did it with the cheese method in the end, and you barely get a reward for it, and that really feels bad. Nightmare Dungeon 100s, there's quite a few problems I have with these. There's no progression up to them. You just farm 40s or 60s, whatever you can really farm pretty quick until you get all the dust that you need, and then you just run a 100. The only problem with that is that there's RNG to find it within the forging of the sigils. You can't actually target the 100 reasonably. It's a 1 in 10 chance, and then you have to hope you get a map that you can actually do, because all of the strategies that involve beating Nightmare 100s aren't very fun. They're either killing things off the screen or absolutely decimating everything on the screen, in like the Barbarian's case, which is now nerfed, so I don't even know if Barbs will be able to clear it. Armor doesn't work, resistances don't work, all the damage reduction you have is completely conditional, and it's hard to line up all of these factors to make them actually reduce enough damage to not just get one shot by trash mobs. There's a lack of variety in the builds. Most of them are either just kite builds or kill them off the screen builds. I understand that you can't make everything perform at that level, otherwise your builds don't mean anything, but I would like to see more engaging content rather than chicken content, so to speak, where you're just running away from everybody and you're not actually engaging with the fight. There's no skill in it, in my opinion, and even if they are going to make something difficult, I think they do need to bring back an infinite scale, like they did in D3. I think capping it at 100 is limiting a lot of people in the community. They can definitely push higher, and it'd be cool to see higher. And I definitely think that's something we could see in the future, but we don't have it now. So just as a recap, I'm going to give the early game a 10 out of 10. I believe that is the absolute strongest point of the entire game, and anybody that plays it is going to really enjoy it, assuming they enjoy the genre. Moving into the mid game, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. I feel like it gives you enough freedom, but maybe it doesn't help enough people that don't understand it. For a game that's trying to be more accessible and more couch gamer friendly and things of that nature, it would be cool to see slightly more direction for those players, but I enjoy the freedom, so I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. And then moving into the late game, I feel like it really starts to challenge you if you haven't played the genre a whole lot. The grind really starts to cement itself in, and you feel a little slow down of the progression, but it's still there. I'll give it an 8 out of 10. And then the absolute end game is not that great right now. There's not enough to do, and the things that there are to do aren't very rewarding, or the methods to get there aren't very intuitive or enjoyable for a lot of people. And I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10. And that's all I really have for you guys. That's been my D4 review from a Druid's point of view after 15 days of gameplay in Season 0. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in Season 1. Have a good one.